I'm here to talk to you about despair and frustration. And I'm also here to talk to you about hope and about how we can use despair and frustration to create hope, and from that, to build on that so that we become confident about our future and about how we can create impact. And I'm going to start the story in Prince George, which is where I grew up, and it's where I spent my teenage years. Prince George is a lumbering town in Canada, and it's a long way away from here, over there somewhere. This is a photo of my mother. She started working when I was 7, and she was a civil servant. She did not go to university. And this is my father, who was a union leader, and he didn't go to university either, and we were in a lumber town. When you're a teenager, you are very susceptible to people around you and to their ideas and their thoughts, and the role models that they come into contact with have a dramatic impact on them. And this is the story that I want to tell you today. This is Dwayne Rubidoux. He was a psychologist. He was the first person I met who loved his job. He loved his work, he loved what he did, and he was on fire every day because he was chasing his passions. And he told me that I should probably think about going to university. He's the first person I met, really, and had any interaction with that said, you know, have you thought about university? I think it's something that you could do, and maybe you should. And I thought about it, and I did it because of his encouragement. When I went to university, I came into contact with this man. This is Jean Leponce. And he was in despair at what I knew about the world, which was not very much. But he suggested to me that I should think about the world and other places, because I think he realized that I'd come from quite a narrow background, and he suggested that I move to England and that I think about studying at a fabulous university. So I did come to England. And this was a fellow student that I met when I first came to England, and I went to the London School of Economics. And he was doing a PhD in mentoring, and he allowed me to see not the importance of mentoring, but how being an entrepreneur was very empowering, and how you could harness despair and anger and frustration and make the world a better place by making things differently and by mentoring and by collaborating with others. When I was at the LSE, we studied this woman. This woman is Dame Steve Shirley, and she had a programming company, and I'd never met or encountered a woman who ran her own business, let alone a computer business. And I was inspired by her story, and her story was one of, she felt she was meeting the glass ceiling, and she thought, well, if I run my own company, I'm not going to meet that glass ceiling, and all I have to do is satisfy my customers and do what they want. And I liked that, and I'd not really sort of encountered that as an idea before. So right after I was inspired by her, I started out as a computer programmer. Which is a little bit strange, because my first degree was political science and my second one was econometrics. So to go from that into programming was a little bit unusual. This summons up to 2000, and you did a really good introduction, so we don't have to do much. After being a computer programmer, I worked with a bunch of MBAs, and it was at that point that I could see why having an MBA and why studying business might actually be a good idea, and how it could give you tools that it could help you solve those problems, which I, by that time, knew the world had and was also quite keen on trying to do something about. My first startup I joined in 1994. I founded my second startup in 1995, sold the first one in 97, and floated the second one in 2000. And that's when I became a portfolio person, which means that you have a lot of part-time jobs. And the next slide looks like a bit of a mess, but just bear with me. For the last 15 years, I've had a lot of part-time jobs. And this is sort of what it looks like. And if you were to classify them, you can see that some of them are in finance, And as an angel investor, I've helped other people solve quite a few problems, 55 and counting, actually 56 as of yesterday. I got very excited about something yesterday. And those companies last year turned over $3.5 billion and employed 20,000 people in more than 20 countries. I also like to invest in venture capital. I'm on the board of Raspberry Pi, and I love Raspberry Pi. It's a tiny little computer company, no puns intended, and we've just shipped our 5 millionth unit. It's also a social business. It's a trading company that is highly profitable. 100% of the profits go into the foundation, and the foundation is used to give tiny little computers to children so they can understand how to manipulate them and what they can do with them. And we focus on the most deprived areas. I used to lecture at the London Business School, which is very exciting, and I did that right after floating my company. And that was a wonderful I love doing that. Cambridge University Press helps you design materials to enable people to learn. And the other thing that I spent some time on is Cambridge Assessment, which is assessing whether or not teaching is effective or learning materials are effective. And that means that as a transaction of learning, understanding what works best so that we learn from mistakes and we learn from what doesn't work is really, really important. I do some stuff at Cambridge University, and that's quite unusual because we focus, it's an 800-year-old organization, and we focus on, in the next 50 years, what do we need to do to make sure that we are still here and still thriving in 50 years' time, which is very different from some of the financing of can we hit payroll, which is what I do as an angel investor. That's often what we're worrying about. And I do some things in policy because I became interested not only in the microeconomics of business, which I'm fascinated by, but also what happens if you add up all of those businesses? What happens if you think about the impact of acting together? I'm now going to go short, sharp, sort of veering through some of the things that I've learned in the last 15 years as a part-time person at a lot of different companies. One of them is that we often talk about startups and companies and how we're thriving. But if you look beneath the data, you can actually see some really interesting insights, such as the red line talks about businesses and how well we are doing at creating them. But the blue line at the top are those businesses that do not employ anybody at all. And if you look at the green line at the bottom, which is those businesses which grow and grow and grow and keep on hiring people, it's not such a great story. And so I want us to think about the sort of businesses that we might want to form and what we need to do in order that they thrive, not only in this country, but in a lot of different countries. I didn't know a few years ago that after 6 years of operation, the average company in the UK only turns over £23,000. You wouldn't believe that if you just sort of looked into the media. And for the avoidance of doubt, that actually doesn't have anything to do with economic growth. And so we need to be careful when we think about linking entrepreneurships and startups to economic growth and to jobs in the economy and to the competitive advantage of this country or any other country. And in fact, what happens is over 10 years, it's a very small percentage of companies that are still there after 10 years, and it's a much smaller proportion of companies that have years of sustained growth of 20% or more. Yet, it's those companies that are the ones that generate 100% of the net new jobs. So 100% of the net new jobs in our economy, and actually in all economies across Europe, and also strangely in the United States, are created by companies less than 5 years old. And 15% of our GDP are created by companies that didn't exist 15 years ago. So this is a really big deal. And if you're a teacher or you're a student and you're looking at a company that's around you, you may think, wrongly, that that company will still be there in 10 years' time. But our economy is very, very dynamic. When I was studying econometrics at the LSE, at that point, you got a job and you stayed with it. At the moment, on average, people have 21 jobs between graduation and retirement. And some of them, like me, have a portfolio of a whole bunch at once, but they're all part-time. The number of companies that grow on a sustained basis are called scale-ups in this country, and there are 8,923 of them, and that's good news. But the despair that I feel is that there are 990,000 open positions right now today. Those companies cannot hire people that will let them fill the customer orders. When was the last time that you heard that Google or Yahoo or some of the other companies couldn't find people to work for them to fill their customer orders? We have this problem, and it's enormous here. And building on the despair, the problem is forecast to get a lot larger. At the moment, it's 1 million. It's forecast by 2018 to increase by an additional 1 million. So that will be 2 million. And that's a skill shortage in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that also will get even larger if children don't understand how to compute and how to do problem solving. If we were to fill all those jobs that I just mentioned, the 990,000 open jobs right now, that would add up to a really large number, $1.4 trillion, if we filled those jobs, and those jobs allowed those companies to accept the customer orders that are there right now. Now that's a nice problem. Or it's a hopeful problem to think about solving. That's on a gross basis. On a net basis, over 10 years' time, what would happen is that would generate extra GDP of $225 billion without a single cent needing to be spent. No money. You don't need money to make this happen. What you do need is collaboration. The people who run these companies are people who harness despair and frustration into hope. This is Ramesh, and he is a boy who was fascinated with cameras, but he was despairing of what was going on in India with people not being able to have access to medical care and analyzing basic things that were wrong with their eyes that caused them to go blind. And so he created a little contraption to add onto an iPhone that lowered the cost of access to that medical technology from something like £10,000 to £20. And now there is hope for the 1 billion children that are now within reach of the contraption that he created because he loved cameras. I want to talk about despair that Julie Dean felt. She had children who were being bullied at school, and she was working for one of those companies that is not growing. And they weren't able to pay her very much, and she thought, I've got a great idea. I can become an entrepreneur, and I can sell these fabulous handbags. I know how to do that. So she created a company that is selling handbags, and she now distributes in many, many, many countries. Her children are in private school, and she has changed her despair into hope and into confidence for herself and for her children and for all of the people who work for her. This is Lucinda, and she is a Scottish lass, and she was in despair when she had her third child and found out that he had a gluten intolerance, which meant that he could not eat the vast majority of food that was sold in the stores. And she remembered that she loved chemistry when she was in school. So she took her chemistry and she created recipes until she could feed her little boy food that was as good as the food that she could buy in the stores. People found out about this. The stores found out about this, and they asked her to make the food for them. And she did. And she's one of the fastest growing companies now in the UK and has distribution and products worldwide. And she's turned her frustration and despair into hope, not only for her, but for tens of millions of people who suffer from gluten intolerances. And this is Kate Ryder, and I really like her. She was frustrated with how hard it was for working women to gain access to medical conditions, because we women who work and try to juggle families as well don't really pay attention to ourselves. And she thought that there was a better way of providing access to world-class problems and scenarios using telemedicine. And she set up a company because she was frustrated with the status quo and saw how modern technology used in other industries could help. The interesting thing about scale-ups in the UK is that they are absolutely everywhere. They're not just in London, they're not just digital, they are also science, and they are also creative companies. And if you think you've got 4 million businesses, you don't really know how to sort that out. But if you understand you've got just less than 9,000, and there's about 250 in each city, that starts to enable you to see what you can do to help change things around. As you know, with 1 million open jobs, or just under that, the major issue for every single one of these fast-growing companies is getting talent into them, and we are here in a form of informal education that's been oversubscribed because everybody's having these problems. The other thing that I learned was that collaborating is absolutely critical. We know intuitively that it's very, very important. But what I've learned in the last 11 years is that it's 90 times more cost-effective to collaborate with others to bring about change. And this 90 times is if you go it alone and you hire things and you don't borrow and you don't sort of do things together, it will cost you 90 times more to bring about that outcome. And I want to tell you why I am currently, as well as filled with despair, also filled with hope about something that we can all do here in this room and worldwide. This here breaks down into political constituencies the number of business leaders of rapidly growing businesses. It also breaks them down into what schools there are. And for teachers and for the parents and for the students, they can now find these fast-growing businesses that are providing jobs all around them. They are no longer invisible because we're using social media to harvest them and to bring them to light. And the cost of doing this to the schools is zero because the information is there and it's just being streamed and harnessed for a new purpose. This shows you, again, how you can use social media to find out about these people all around us who are building businesses, the Lucindas and the Julies and the Rameshes and the Kates. You can use the data from LinkedIn and from Doodle, just gather it in via their APIs and for the first time ever, make visible to everyone what is going on around them and what they need to do in order to change it. And I spoke to you earlier about role models and how I'd been motivated. We've measured for the last 3 years what happens if you put these role models in front of children in classrooms. And what happens is pretty extraordinary. After just one session of 4 speakers, the average number of students who are interested in working for a startup or a scale-up rises from 60% to just about 90%. And if you look at those that are interested in finally studying science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, it goes up from 18% to 54% after 4 little TED Talks just like this one, which is incredible. So think about what you can do about that. Think about the children that are in our classrooms today and our own children, and think about what companies they might go work for. By the way, we know they don't exist today. So think about how we're going to help them navigate that career path so that they understand the impact that they can have and how they harness their own passions. So if you don't yet have your own children, then tell teachers at your old school how they can use these tools that are free to capture the imaginations of their children. If you have your own children, then go to their school and talk to them about how they can highlight the jobs of tomorrow by reaching out to the people. And you'll know and you'll be safe in your knowledge that you will be having a tremendous impact, and that without all of us doing something in this room, we will not manage to solve that problem. And it is probably the biggest problem of our time at the moment. Thank you very much.